Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a special show today. We're going to talk about bands that had some very notable comebacks or reunions. So what are the criteria, you might be asking? So a band that maybe had been around for a bit, released a couple albums that maybe weren't well received, and then bounced back with an album that everybody loved, sold lots, big tours, that sort of thing. They came back with a passion, all right? They came back from all odds, and they got back to like what got them there in the first place. Okay, another good comeback might be a band that, lost a major part of their group. Singer left, famous, popular singer left. Maybe they lost one of their, great guitar players, right? Got some new blood in and came back bigger and better than ever, right? Or how about those comebacks that are also looked at as like reunions? So a band breaks up, okay, and in many, many years later, they get back together as if they never left, right? There's been a lot of these, right, through a lot of different genres that we cover here. Rock, hard rock, metal, progressive rock. All right, I'm going to kind of touch on some of the more notable ones. This is not exhaustive, so, I'm sure there's going to be others that might come to the mind of some of you. So feel free to chime in the comments below and talk about some of those other bands or groups or artists that kind of made a major comeback in a big way that was very notable to you or, to the world at large, so to speak. I'm not going to go in any real order here. I got a bunch of them that I wanted to kind of talk about. And again, this is a topic that was brought up by quite a few people over the last couple of months, and I've just kind of been keeping notes just so you guys know. We get a gazillion requests here from folks wanting me to rank albums by certain bands, songs by certain bands, different kind of theme shows, all that kind of stuff. Some we've done before, some we may never do, and some that I'm considering. So, don't take my silence as a, that I'm blowing you off. I have a to-do list that's absolutely enormous. All right, so you guys just have to realize I can't get to everything. I had a couple people who've asked over the last couple of days. It's like, I am patiently waiting for a Moody Blues show. I can't believe you haven't done one yet. It's like, first of all, as I've said many times before, it's like I don't have every Moody Blues album. So it's, I could probably rank the 70s albums. That's about all I got. So just remember, you guys are requesting a lot of stuff. I only have, a certain amount of hours to dedicate towards this, right? Because I got a lot of other stuff going on, full-time job and things. So I'm trying to get to as much as I can. But I'm trying to cover the stuff that I'm, pretty well versed in. So there's some stuff that some bands, music that I just don't know a lot about. I'm not going to do a show on something that I don't know much about. All right. Sorry. So anyway, so let's get started here. So best comeback and reunion albums from rock history. Okay. Like I said, this is not going to be completely exhaustive. I don't have probably every single one that ever happened, but these are some of the ones that I came up with after kind of putting this together. So one of my favorite success stories, and of course I'm going to do my favorite band of all time first. It's the way it goes here. Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers, 1984. Right? Of course, that was for me. At the time I was 18 years old, fresh in college. And Purple were, at the time, one of my favorite bands, if not my favorite band at the time. But, they had been gone since Come Taste the Band. All right. 9 years prior. And, actually, no, not 9 years, because Come Taste the Band was, 76? So, yeah, about 8-9 years. I'm trying to remember exactly when Come Taste the Band was. Was that 76 or 75? No, I think it was 75, so that's 9 years. This was the reunion of the classic Mark II era of the band. Okay, so Ian Gillan, Roger Glover, Ritchie Blackmore, Ian Pace, John Lord, who had not done an album together since 1973's Who Do We Think We Are? Okay, so finally, and in between that time, Gillan, the Gillan Band, he also played with Black Sabbath briefly. Ritchie Blackmore had started, Rainbow, because he actually left the band prior to the Come Taste the Band album, right after Stormbringer. Okay, Glover was also with Ritchie in Rainbow. Okay, you had Ian Pace and John Lord, both in and out of Whitesnake and Gary Moore, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of things going on there. The band was keeping busy separately, but not together. And here they are getting back together for Perfect Strangers. It was a huge hit, both commercially, critically, with the fans. Big tour. It went on to sell Platinum Plus worldwide. Okay, the Mark II era of the band was together again. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last too long. We would see all the problems kind of resurfacing again. But Perfect Strangers, for me anyway, one of the greatest comebacks of all time in hard rock history. Also, let's talk about the Allman Brothers, who have actually had two really notable comebacks. So first of all, the Brothers and Sisters album, okay, which came out in 1973. That album came out on the heels of plenty of tragedy, right? So, in 1971, they lost Dwayne Allman in a motorcycle accident, right, during the recording of the Eat a Peach album. Okay, 1 year, almost to the day after that, almost in the same spot, they lost their bass player, Barry Oakley, also to a motorcycle accident. Okay, band is, the two of their main members gone. How do we get past this tragedy? Instead, they decided to regroup. Okay, with Dickie Betts basically kind of saying, you know what, I'm going to help pick up the pieces here because we're not done yet. And out comes the Brothers and Sisters albums, which was a huge album for them. Okay, went platinum. All right, spawned some great singles, and kept the band going. Right, but of course, a lot of things happened after that in the ensuing years, and they would actually wind up breaking up in the early 80s, okay? All going their separate ways, doing separate things. And it wasn't until 1990 that the band regrouped yet again, okay, with Alan Woody on bass, Warren Haynes on guitar alongside the rest of the surviving members of the original band to release an album called Seven Turns, which hit number 53 on the Billboard chart and spawned a couple hit singles, notably Good Clean Fun, the title track Seven Turns, and It Ain't Over Yet. And that spawned a whole decade plus of classic Allman Brothers material and red hot live shows. Okay, so two big comebacks for the Allman Brothers there. How about another one of my beloved top two bands of all time, Black Sabbath? Another band that had numerous comebacks. So first, in the late 70s, started sputtering a little bit. They released the Never Say Die album in 1978, one of their worst-selling albums of the decade. Not a big critical hit. I know there's people out there that love that album, but there's also a lot of hardcore Sabbath fans who really don't like that album, myself included. Drug addiction, cocaine use, rampant in the band, alcohol addiction. The band is a mess. Ozzy is a complete mess. They wind up going their separate ways with Ozzy, right? And, did that disastrous tour with Van Halen, which was great for Van Halen, but by all intents and purposes, from most people you talk to who witnessed that tour, Van Halen blew Sabbath off the stage almost every single night. Not a great situation to be in for, the godfathers of heavy metal. So what did they do? They were forced to regroup. They wound up hooking up with a singer who just left Rainbow, okay, Ronnie James Dio. Went to the studio and created a little album called Heaven and Hell in 1980, okay, which was 2 years after the Never Say Die album. Okay, they're first with Ronnie, and that album reinvigorates the band. Okay, they take on a brand, kind of a new sound, faster, heavier, ready for the 80s, all right, different type of lyrical content, obviously very different vocals. And that album went platinum, plus worldwide. Okay, the big tour with Blue Oyster Cult, the Black and Blue tour. All right, so that was a big, big, big comeback for the band. A band that a lot of people left for dead, right? They would also, there's some other kind of comebacks in the Sabbath history here. So, of course, that whole liaison with Dio and drummer Vinny Appice did not last too long, but is a very beloved lineup of the band. They would get back together, those four, on the Dehumanizer album, 1992. Okay, so roughly 10 years, a decade after that band splintered. Okay, Dehumanizer was their first album after the Tear album with Tony Martin on vocals. Again, first with Dio and Appice since Mob Rules in 1981. Hit number 44 on the Billboard charts. Billboard charts. Okay, it's another kind of comeback for the band. As well, how about The Devil You Know in 2009? Okay, once again, because the Dehumanizer lineup did not last long. That was basically an album, a tour, and done. Everybody went their separate ways. Back to Dio, back to Sabbath, all right? Tony Martin's back in the band again. But back in 2009, they decided, we're going to do it all over again. We're going to do it again. We're older, we're wiser. They put out the album The Devil You Know. Okay, after a nice little compilation that had a couple new tracks, they went and did a full album in 2009 as Heaven and Hell. Number 8 Billboard charts here in the U.S. Big tour, big show at Radio City Music Hall that I was in the house for. Live album, a lot of touring, and then, we lost Ronnie not too long after that. Also, in 2013, the classic lineup of the band with Ozzy, okay, without Bill Ward, of course, on drums, but Geezer, Tony, and Ozzy get together for the 13 album, their 13th studio album. Okay, first with Ozzy since 1978's Never Say Die, and their first #1 Billboard charting album. Big success, big The End tour, the final tour, did big business. Okay, another big comeback. A lot of comebacks in the Sabbath. Sabbath family. All right, might as well talk about Ozzy too. I'm going to skip ahead on my list a little bit here. So, of course, Ozzy leaves Sabbath, gets kicked out of Sabbath, whatever this actual story is that you believe. He's gone from Sabbath. He's in the dumps. He's in the throes of, drinking and drugging way, way too much. Goes into the studio with a couple guys, from Uriah Heep, okay, and a young guitar player named Randy Rhoads, okay. So Randy Rhoads, along with bassist Bob Daisley, who was soon to be in Uriah Heep, not quite yet. Or was he in... He was on the Abominog album. Well, anyway, also ex-Rainbow. Okay, Lee Kerslake, of course, longtime drummer with Uriah Heep. Blizzard of Oz album, recorded in 1980, released late 1980, 81, depending on whether the UK or the US. All right, number 21 Billboard charts, but more importantly, it goes on to sell over time 5 million plus copies worldwide. Okay. Big comeback for Ozzy. Again, a guy who everybody was like, oh, is he going to be rock's next tragedy? And he comes out bigger, better than ever, and ironically selling a lot more albums than his former bandmates throughout the decade. Go figure. All right, how about Van Halen? So, in 1984, they released the 1984 album. Shortly thereafter, Mr. David Lee Roth decides he's had enough. He wants to go solo. I'm bigger and better than the band. I need to go do my own thing. They're left without a vocalist, so they go find a guy named Sammy Hagar. Of course, had a pretty good solo career. Was also in the early version of Montrose. They released the 5150 album in 1986. Goes on to sell over 6 million copies. 6 times platinum, #1, Billboard charts, all sorts of hit singles, right? Totally invigorated the band. Changed their music a bit, right? All of a sudden, Van Halen's sound, a little bit different going into the mid-late 80s. But it worked. They were selling more records than ever, right? Dave doing his own thing, doing quite well too, right? So for a little while anyway, the split worked very well for both of them. Okay. After Sammy left the band, a number of years later, and they had that one-off album with Gary Cherone. Okay. They do their first album again with David Lee Roth since 1984 in, many, many years. Many, many years. Different Kind of Truth. Their first studio album in 14 years since the Cherone album, Van Halen 3. Debuts at #2 on the Billboard charts. Pretty well respected by a lot of fans, right? Pretty good comeback from the band. Big tours. Where the band is right now, it's kind of hard to say, but for a short time there, Van Halen were once again doing some big, big business. All right. How about Accept? German heavy metal band, right? Blood of the Nations, 2010. First album in 14 years after the Predator album in 1996, and their first with ex-TT Quick vocalist Mark Tornillo. Debuts in the top 200 Billboard, very well respected by fans, and it has spawned a couple of other really strong albums from the band. Of course, my wife is home from the supermarket. Dogs are going bananas. Sorry, guys. So, Accept, back in big business, all right? Just kicking ass. Great comeback album, considering that a lot of the 90s albums they did were not very well received. Iron Maiden, Brave New World, 2000. Okay, they had been without their famous lead singer, Bruce Dickinson, for a number of years, right? Since 1992, Fear of the Dark, the last album he appeared on. They had a couple of the albums with Blaze Bailey on lead vocals. Not very well received. Not terrible albums, but just not a good fit vocal-wise. Right, so they released Brave New World. Okay, number 39 on the Billboard charts. Platinum all over the world. Maiden is back in big business, playing large arenas, okay, once again. and they haven't stopped since. Judas Priest, kind of a couple comebacks, right? So in 1990, they released Painkiller. Okay, first album in 2 years after the somewhat disappointing Ram It Down, which didn't do as big business as some of the albums before it. Kind of disappointing to some fans, although some love it, some don't. All right. Number 26 on the Billboard charts, Painkiller, gold album sales. And for the true metal fans, a kind of return to form. And for those people who were into heavier music at the time, specifically like a lot of thrash metal, this is like kind of like Priest's entry into the thrash metal sweepstakes. All right. Big tour ensues. And then before you know it, you blink, and Rob Halford decides to move on to other things. Right. So they bring in Tim Ripper Owens, do a couple albums and tours with Tim. Not a lot of people buying those albums. Not a lot of people watching the tours, playing in clubs. All right. Halford comes back into the band for Angel Retribution, 2005, 15 years later. Number 13 Billboard charts, big tour, back to playing arenas again. And Halford and the band have been going strong ever since. How about AC/DC, Back in Black? Probably one of the greatest comebacks of all time, right? Bon Scott dies, getting set to record the Back in Black album in 1980. He passes away. What are we going to do? Well, they decide to go on. They get a singer named Brian Johnson from a band called Geordie. Okay. That album goes on to sell over 25 million copies. Number 4 in the Billboard charts. One of the biggest selling heavy rock albums of all time, if not the biggest selling. And the band have never looked back since, right? All right. So Rolling Stones, Steel Wheels, 1989. Not so much a comeback as a comeback to big business once again. So, of course, they released the Dirty Work album in 1986, which was a moderately good seller for the Stones. But Mick Jagger, Keith Richards at odds about a lot of things. They go into this kind of war of words. They're not talking. All right. They eventually patch up their differences. They get together. The band puts together a new album called Steel Wheels. Debuts at number 3 on the Billboard charts. Goes on to sell 2 times platinum. Okay. Enormous tour. Stones are back. Big business. I saw them on that tour. Bigger, better. Everything's bigger about the Stones now at this point in time. All right. From that moment on, the Stones would do big business, specifically on the live front. They would tour sporadically, but every time they do, huge numbers. All right. Their albums, by this time, you're working your way into the 90s and on. Albums aren't selling like they used to, but the Stones are still really, really big business worldwide going forward. How about let's go to a little bit of death metal, right? Carcass, Surgical Steel, 2013. Okay, the band's last studio album was 1996's Swan Song. Supposed to be the end of the band. They come back, get together with most of their classic members to release Surgical Steel, okay, on Century Media Records, I believe. It actually debuts number 41 on the U.S. Billboard charts. A nice tour ensues. Sip of my iced tea. Okay, Carcass is back. Great tour, by the way. I saw that tour. All right, how about Steely Dan, Two Against Nature? All right, from 2000. Their first studio release since 1980's Gaucho. And Two Against Nature, while to many people might not be as classic a Steely Dan album as some of those earlier records, still strong enough to go and win 4 Grammy Awards, right? Still strong enough to debut number 6 on the Billboard charts, and still strong enough to sell platinum, all right? Platinum sales in 2000. That's pretty good. It's actually a very good album, all right? Steely Dan back to making music once again, all right? It was good to have them back. All right, I'm going to throw Aerosmith here. All right. Again, there's some stuff on these lists that I may not be big fans of the albums, but I totally understand how big of a comeback they were. So I think Aerosmith actually was on the comeback trail with Done with Mirrors in 1985. This is the first album they did with Joe Perry since he left after 1979's Night in the Ruts. All right. It's a very strong album. It's a short album, but it's very strong. I think goes back to the classic Aerosmith sound. Number 36 Billboard charts. It goes gold, 500,000 copies plus. All right. But they made an even bigger comeback, you could say, with Permanent Vacation in 1987. So now they're fresh on Geffen Records. All right. Debuts at number 11 on the charts. Much bigger jump than Done with Mirrors. It winds up selling 5 times platinum. All right. You got Angel and Ragdoll. Dude Looks Like a Lady. All hit singles, right? Even bigger success with Pump in 1989, which would sell 7 times platinum. All right. And the band, obviously bringing in a lot of outside writers, which helped with their more accessibility of their songs. And before you know it, Aerosmith is bigger than ever, right? Probably one of the biggest comebacks of that era. Meatloaf, Bad Outta Hell Part 2, 1993. We all know how big that debut was, Bad Outta Hell in 1977. Well, Meatloaf and his bandmates would go on to some strong sales in the next 3 or 4 album releases, right? Nothing quite as big as that debut until 1993's sequel to the original album, right? Okay. It would debut at number 1 on the Billboard charts here in the States. It would sell over 5 million copies, 5 times platinum. I'd Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That was a huge hit single, number 1 in most markets. Okay, and as a sequel to, the 1977 Monster debut, pretty good. Not quite 14 times platinum, right? But for a early 90s album, pretty good seller. He would go and revisit Bad Outta Hell once again after that, right, for a third time. Not quite as popular then. I think maybe the whole Bad Outta Hell thing is kind of worn off by now, but those first 2, big business. How about David Bowie? Let's Dance, 1983. Number 1 album, okay, 10 times platinum worldwide, huge seller. He released the Scary Monsters album in 1980, which was a very well-respected album and sold decently, but not quite a huge international hit. And he had seen a lot of his album releases the sales start to dwindle a little bit, but that all changed with Let's Dance. Okay, had a couple hit singles on the album. You had the title track, you had China Girl, Modern Love, all big singles, videos on MTV. Okay, and also, very importantly, brought a guy named Stevie Ray Vaughan, who played guitar on the album, into the spotlight really for the first time. Okay, huge album for David Bowie. How about Jeff Beck? Guitar Shop, 1989. Okay, so Jeff had been kind of quiet on the recording scene since 1985's Flash, which was a different album for him, kind of like a pop, funky, kind of release. I dug that album, though. I'm a big fan of Flash, but not a huge seller. Okay, and he comes back with his first all-instrumental album in quite some time, featuring Tony Hymas and Terry Bozzio on drums and keyboards. Okay, debuts at number 49 on the Billboard charts. It won a Grammy for Best Rock Instrumental, and kind of reminded the world just how great a guitar player Jeff Beck still was, and he's been a lot more active on the recording front ever since. Another great comeback, a monster comeback actually, 1989, Supernatural by Santana. Okay, say what you want about the album. He brings in all sorts of, it's not so much a Santana band album as a Carlos Santana solo album with a million guest stars. So all these instrumentalists and musicians and singers, from all different genres coming in to help out on this album. It was a huge international hit. It's his first album released since 1992's Milagro. Okay, sells over 30 million copies worldwide. Huge album. Number 1 Billboard charts. All right. Smooth and Maria Maria, enormous singles. All right. He would also try and replicate that very same formula on the album that would come after that as well. All right. Got to talk about Pink Floyd here a little bit. 1994 is The Division Bell. They released in 1987 A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which was the first studio album after Roger Waters left the band. That was a pretty big seller as well. Maybe not as big a critical success with journalists and fans as they would have liked. But 7 years later, they put out The Division Bell. Big difference here. Number 1 on the Billboard charts. Sells over 7 million worldwide. Of course, that monstrous tour. I think this was the big comeback that they really wanted with Momentary Lapse of Reason, but they got it a few years later. How about Van de Graaff Generator? 2005 with Present, their first studio album since 1977's The Quiet Zone, The Pleasure Dome, right? And it's got all classic members of the band, Peter Hamill, Hugh Banton, David Jackson, and Guy Evans. Pretty well-received album, double disc album, one disc of all new studio tracks, one of a lot of kind of instrumentals and improvisation, things like that. Maybe not a great album, but as a notable comeback, it's got to rank on this list. Because I think whoever would think that Van de Graaff Generator was going to get back together, right? Sticking with Prog, how about Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Black Moon, 1992? Again, not a great album, but, their first albums together as a trio since 1978's kind of disastrous Love Beach, right? Number 78 Billboard charts, sold pretty well, did a big tour, all right? Again, not a great album, but very notable return for the band. 2009, Alice in Chains, Black Gives Way to Blue. Okay, their first album since the death of Lane Staley, 2002. Their first one with new vocalist guitarist William Duvall, who shares vocals with Jerry Cantrell in the band now. Debuts number 5 in the Billboard charts, gold certification. Alice in Chains is back, sounding very similar. I know a lot of people, really miss Lane, but they still sound like Alice in Chains. The music is still heavy and moody, okay? Still doomy. Those vocals are very similar, okay? To a lot of people, Alice just kept continuing on. Alice in Chains kept going strong and still are to this day. How about 2004's Tempo of the Damned by Exodus? All right, thrash metal tyrants from the West Coast. It's their first album since 1992's Force of Habit and reunites them once again with their classic vocalist Steve Zetro Souza. Okay, he would leave the band once again after that album, but as an album, after 12 years of inactivity, okay, and releasing studio material, it is a kick-ass album, and I think to this day remains one of the hottest albums in their catalog for you thrash fans. New wave of British heavy metal, Legends, Satan, Live Sentence, 2013. Their first album since 1987, Suspended Sentence, okay, since they got back together with most of the classic lineup, okay. They have actually released multiple albums and tours with this same lineup, okay, which is arguably the new music they're creating is even better than those 2 albums they did in the early 80s. Cynic, Traced in Air from 2008, all right. Groundbreaking, progressive, spacey death metal band from the early 90s. This is their first album since their debut, Focus, in 1993. Reunites Paul Masvidal, Sean Reinert, Sean Malone, and new guy Timon Krudenier. All right. While it may not be exactly like that first debut album, less death metal. There's some growls on the album, but it's more just a really cool kind of proggy space rock album with some killer instrumentation, guitars and bass and drums. Just an amazing, amazing album. As long as you're not looking for Focus Part 2, right? Celtic Frost, Monotheist from 2006. Their first release since 1990's Vanity/Nemesis. A return to form, very similar to their early material from the early mid-'80s. Heavy, even probably little doomy. I would say there's a lot of doomy riffs going on in this album. Reunites Thomas Gabriel Fisher with Martin Eric Ain, 2 of the members of the original band, okay, along with Franco Sisa and Errol Unala, all right. Unfortunately, this will be the one and only release we've seen from them so far, as Tom Gabriel basically put the Celtic Frost name to rest. Started up Triptychon, and we lost Martin Eric Ain a couple years, not that long ago, actually. All right, Candlemass. How about some Doom? Candlemass, self-titled, 2005. Their first album since 1999 from the 13th Son. More importantly, it's their first album with the classic vocalist Messiah Marcolin back on vocals for the first time since 1989's Tales of Creation. It would also only be the last album they would do with Messiah, because he would leave shortly thereafter. He hasn't been seen in the Candlemass front since. They've carried on with a handful of different vocalists since, but the band's still releasing really, really good material. But that would be the big comeback with Messiah, as short-lived as it was. Let's go back to thrash from the Bay Area. Testament, The Formation of Damnation from 2008. Huge comeback album for the band, right? First of all, it was their first release in 7 years since 2001's First Strike Till Deadly. Their first with guitarist Alex Skolnick and bassist Greg Christensen since the early 90s, right? So over a decade. It debuts at number 59 on the U.S. Billboard charts. Highly respected album by a lot of people, and they've been kind of rampaging ever since, putting out one cranking album after another. New one just came out recently as well. All right, legendary Doom act Pentagram, Last Rites from 2011. It was their first release in 7 years since 2004's Show 'Em How. Their first time on Metal Blade Records, very notable for that, and the first to feature guitarist Victor Griffin since 1994's Be Forewarned. Also spawned a really good tour. I saw him on that tour. Really good album, very, very notable. Great comeback for the band. How about Merciful Fate, In the Shadows, 1993. Their first studio album together since 1984's Don't Break the Oath, featuring most of the original band, save for new drummer Snowy Shaw. Okay. Long time in between albums there. My last but not least, from 2012, Angel Witch, As Above, So Below. Alrighty then. As Above, So Below from Angel Witch, new wave of British heavy metal legends. Their first release since Frontal Assault in 1986. That's a long-ass time, ladies and gentlemen, and a great album. Okay, they've since also released a new one back in 2019 that was very, very notable as well. So there you go. A batch of notable comebacks and reunions. Like I said, I know there's more. I was just thinking as I was talking, there was a great reunion from Cactus, about a decade and a half ago or so, or is it longer than that now? Geez, then there's so many others, right? So feel free to chime in below some of your notable comebacks in, rock, hard rock, prog, metal, that sort of thing. Bands who have either were away for a long time, got back together, or lost a very important member, rebounded, okay, with a studio album. And again, we're talking about bands that release albums, not so much like bands who just get back together and do a tour. Like some of you might be mentioning Cream, okay, who got back together and did a tour and released a live album. I'm talking about actually go back and record new music, and do the touring, that whole kind of thing. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're on YouTube all the damn time. So coming up tomorrow, we're going to rank the studio albums of Black Widow. All right, underground sensations from the late 60s, early 70s. All right, some of you might be saying, I've never heard Black Widow before. Well, tune into the show, you find out a little bit about them, and you go listen to them on your own. I'm going to get to that Rolling Stones ranking the studio albums very, very soon. Next couple days, I hope. Also going to do Trapeze as well. That's coming up over the next day or two. And I got a couple other like shows like this that I'm going to be doing. I know I keep getting some questions from folks. Pete, can you do a show where you talk about some of your favorite 70s like pop, like AM hit songs? And I would love to do that, and I'm going to do that. But so that'll be coming sometime soon, because that's feel good music for everybody. I think if you're a certain age specifically, but I think for anybody, a lot of those 70s songs are legendary for a reason. So I will put together like my top maybe 20 or 25 70s pop songs. All right, so we'll do that as well. In addition, there's been a lot of requests for more power metal stuff and things like that, so we'll get to it all in time. We got Iced Earth coming up this weekend, so a lot of good stuff happening. We're going to be doing a show very soon on King Diamond as well as Amon Amarth. So that's coming up over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, right? So all sorts of things going on. So stay tuned for all of it, and we'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.